Welcome back to AgriTalk. Thank you very much for keeping it KTN Farmers TV. Today we are talking about disasters and climate change. And with me is Professor Shem Wadinga, who is a retired professor of chemistry, who is helping us understand this particular topic on disasters and climate change. Prof, before we went away, we were talking about why some of our lakes are rising. And you've said it might not be climate change. We may not blame climate change for that. So my other question is, let me go global a little bit. We've seen a lot of fires, especially in the US and Australia, wildfires. Could this be part of the disaster we are talking about that has been caused by climate change?
Yes. Again, the verdict is towards climate change. Mm-hmm. And I can explain it this way. When you have forests and there's not enough moisture, the leaves will dry up and drop. As the leaves dry up and dropped, and the temperature continues to rise, their kindling point is very low. So any spark will start a fire. And that fire is, somebody might have lit a match and threw it somewhere, and it starts, or an electrical pole may spark and start a fire. That match or burning of the forest may not be directly related to climate change, but the shortage of water, the shortage of moisture, and the dryness is related to climate change. And hence, we are seeing that heat accumulation in regions is making the climate more fragile and tending to make fires more frequent. And at this moment, we have evidence alluding to climate change,
okay,
but we have no evidence saying this is exactly not the reason for the climate change. But we know that the temperatures are going up and the surface air is warm and the sea level surface temperature is warm, and all of these are accumulating heat that do not favor the accumulation of water to dampen the soil or the forest.
Okay. What about the increase in the number of tornadoes and all that phenomena that's associated with
Yes.
tornadoes?
Yes. The best example I can give is the recent tropical cyclone which hit Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia. You see, our temperatures are guided by the lakes or the oceans. The oceans have the largest surface of the air. And as the surface of the ocean heats up, the wind blows from the cold to the hot. Okay? When there is coldness in the Pacific Ocean, then it will rush the cold wind across Atlantic to our side and across the continent to the eastern side. When the Indian Ocean ocean temperature is high, there must be a cold wind which comes to cool it. But if there is no cold wind, then what happens is that there is a turbulence. There's a gradient of high and low, and that creates the wind to go around from low to high temperatures, low temperature to high temperature. And that creates a cyclone. And that cyclone is generated through the equator, because equator is where the sun's radiation is highest. So the temperature between the ocean and the land differential creates a cyclone. And that cyclone hits us when you are 10 degrees from the equator, north or south.
Okay.
okay? And that cyclone is what hit Mozambique, Malawi, and and uh, and uh, uh, and Zambia recently, and it has hit it much more frequently. This also happened in the Eden area. The Eden cyclones are also creating havoc that side. So we have this differential of temperatures and the heat that is built up, which has to be reduced, dissipated, which causes these cyclones or the hurricanes. And it is the magnitude of the hurricane. In fact, one older lady told me that they in the Caribbean can see the cyclone coming from Morocco, from Africa, to go and hit them in the Caribbean, because they can see the heat building up, and that heat has to be cooled. And as it cooled, then you have a hurricane hitting the other side. So that's how nature balances itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do we mitigate this, especially this the rising number of cyclones and
Mitigation
yes.
is again reducing the amount of heat absorbing gases in the atmosphere.
Okay.
If we can reduce the heat absorbing gases in the atmosphere and we reduce the heat pump between uh, uh, these gases and the surface of the earth, we will stabilize the surface of the earth temperature. We will not eliminate everything, because these gases have a very long lifetime. Like carbon dioxide will last in the atmosphere for 100 years or more. So once it is up there, it will stay there for a long time. But we want to reduce the amount we are pumping in to add to what has been there.
Okay. I've also seen in countries. There's a time we visited the Netherlands, and farmers were complaining on the rules, on the new regulations that were there, on them reducing the amount of waste that the animals were producing, because it was also adding to the gases you're talking about. How do farms also contribute to this?
In a number of ways. One of them is what you have just said. Okay, animals are produced to feed us, and our diet has been lately more dependent on animal protein. As we consume the protein, we require more animals to continue to give us that protein. The animals have to graze, and as they graze, they have to digest the grass, and they have to emit out the gases. The gases that come out of the animals is carbon dioxide and methane. And these are the heat absorbers, which are again pumped into the atmosphere. We increase these gases by the way we plant. The soil itself absorbs carbon dioxide, but when you remove the cover, okay, the grasses or the trees, then you release the carbon dioxide in the soil. And again, it goes into the atmosphere. So the heat level is increased by doing that one. We increase the carbon dioxide by the type of uh, animals and food we plant. If we plant trees, the trees will absorb carbon dioxide for a long time, and the release of the carbon dioxide will be reduced. But if you fell trees, you deforest your forest, you cut your forest down, then the final end product of wood is the release of carbon dioxide and methane.
Okay.
So there are a number of ways that we increase the accumulation of these gases in the atmosphere, and for that reason, we end up harming ourselves. And that's why in our country, the government has decided that we have to plant more trees. We have to increase the forest level at about 10% or more. And we have not reached there yet.
Okay.
We need to do more.
Okay. What about the waste that we throw away, dumping all over the place? How do these contribute also? And also remember, I was watching some documentary on
Yes,
that
yes.
we have so much debris in space
Yes.
from satellites that are no longer working,
Yes.
all those things that are just floating. How are all these adding up to
Well,
this?
let me start with the waste. The more food we have, the more food waste we produced.
Okay.
So we must plan in such a way that we reduce the food waste, because the end product of a food waste is carbon dioxide and methane and water. Okay? And for that reason, when we have a lot of agricultural waste or any other food waste, we are going to increase the amount of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases into the atmosphere. And we are going to increase the, the, the heat pump. Okay? Let me to the listeners, let me explain what I mean by heat pump. For instance, if you have a car and you park it on the sun, and you lock the windows and you lock the doors, and you step out for an hour or two, when you come back, you find that the temperature inside the car is much warmer than the temperature of the outside. And the reason is that as the sun comes in, it hits on these molecules and they begin to move faster and faster and bump into one another. As they bump into one another, they radiate heat. And as they radiate heat, the temperature in the confined place of the car gets warmer. That's what I mean by the heat pump.
Okay.
Yeah? So we increase the collision of these molecules with one another, and as they collide, they radiate what we call kinetic energy.
Prof, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the heat pump, and especially from the moment when I come back to my car. Yeah.
Yes, the heat pump is really uh, the molecules within the car moving at faster speed, and they're hitting the wall and the glass of the car, but they cannot escape. They're hitting the other molecule, and they're making the temperature within the car to rise. That is exactly what we mean by the impact of climate change. When these gases in the atmosphere are up there and the sunlight comes, then the sunlight is reflected either by the soil or by water or other surface, rooftop and what have you, and they go back. And the energy that they came with is not going to be the energy that they are going back with. They may come in the energy of visible light or ultraviolet light or X-ray light. The X-ray light is often destroyed by ozone in the atmosphere. But the visible light and the infrared light will hit us. But infrared light has many wavelengths. So when it goes back, the gases absorb them that I've been talking about. And those gases now remit the excess
Okay.
of the energy. And that excess of the energy is remitted back to the surface of the earth in the form of microwave length. And today we cook with microwave ovens, and we know it takes very little time to heat. So it is the same heat that was coming up, but it's coming down. And this heat makes the surface of temperature, the temperature surface and the air surface temperature and the ocean temperature, lake surface temperature become warmer. And that is exactly the heat pump that we are talking about, because we have concentrated a lot of these gases in the atmosphere. They continue to absorb this radiation and remit it back, and then there's again remitted back in a longer wavelength, and then they absorb it and remit it back, and it continues like that, and we get distortion of the climate
Okay.
or the weather.
What about the debris I was talking about that is floating in space? Does it have any impact
The
to global
debris,
warming?
the debris would not remit anything.
Mm.
They're just clouding or crowding the space.
Okay.
And for them, the only thing is now to see how to catch them and remove them. But they do not play a role. This is, this is the space itself, the sun remitting energy, and
Us reflecting back the same.
some are reflected back, some come to the surface of the earth, and then the surface of the earth reflects it back and meets this concentration of greenhouse gases up there, which absorb them, and after certain absorption, releases it back. So it is just a pump between the gases up there and the surface of the earth. But in the meantime, they create the warming of the earth because of the bumping of the molecules of the surface, because we have nitrogen, we have water molecules, we have oxygen, we have all these gases that are in the atmosphere. So these gases are made to move much faster and bump into one another and then release kinetic energy, which makes the heat or the temperature rise.
Okay. Apart from us reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit, is there a way of getting rid of the already greenhouse gas that is up there?
Now, when it is up there, it needs a very powerful refrigeration system to get rid of them. So this is what I meant by saying the half-life of these gases, like carbon dioxide, is 100 years. Methane is less, maybe 10 or a few years. So the more the gases are there, the longer they will stay, and the longer they will continue to doing the absorbing and remitting, absorbing and remitting.
Okay. Now let's go to what are governments or players in in this world, government, private sector, doing to help mitigate some of these problems?
Yes, we have the United Nations Convention for Climate Change. And every year, like this year, they will be meeting in Glasgow to review what the governments are doing. Because the conventions has made the governments to commit themselves to certain activities. Some of the activities are mitigation, okay? The first important role of the government is to mitigate. For instance, in Kenya, we used to rely on hydrothermal energy. The water is no longer sufficient for supplying us with energy from hydropower. So we have now diverted to geothermal. That's a clean energy without any bad impacts. We have now reverted to wind energy. We have just installed a 310 megawatt wind power, which is generating energy. We are promoting solar panels on top of roofs, and we are promoting conversion from fossil fuel driven motor vehicles to electric motor vehicles. Those are roles of the government. The second role of the government is to make resources and infuse awareness to the people so that we can begin to adapt to climate change. Adaptation is the mode and the preferred AU vehicle for escaping climate change in Africa. And adaptation is simply looking at how do we solve this phenomena which is causing us. Well, we cannot change the rains pattern, but we can conserve water. We can have a way of agriculture which is different. we can have rain-fed agriculture, and if the rain is not there, we catch the rain when it falls, and we make the rain now work and help us produce food. Let me by talking about adaptation of to food production. One of the things that has become obvious is that food production has become very scientific.
Weather patterns.
And we have the Kenya Meteorological Services, which issues the seasonal outlook. It tells us in those forecasts or seasonal forecasts, like the June, July, August, September is now out. It tells us that certain areas will have this type of rain and certain areas will have this type of rain. As a farmer, the first thing I would like to advise is listen to that outlook and consult your agriculturalist, the CALRO, Kenya Agricultural and Lifestyle Research Organization. What seed do I need to plant when the outlook is like this? Get that seed. But whatever the seed is, if it says there is going to be short rains or plenty of rain, get the seeds that will have longer length of growth and will require more water. Don't put all of your farm under that seed because the weather changes and it's unpredictable. Even the meteorologists cannot predict it all the time. So put about 70% or 75% of your farm with that seed. The other one, put
Okay.
the other seeds which, if the rain fails completely or is reduced, will still have enough water.
Okay.
And hence, when the season ends, you have a mixture of crops that will give you some food for your family.
Okay. Thank you very much, uh, Professor Shem, for sparing some time to be with us to enlighten us about disasters and climate change and what we need to know and what we need to do to avert more disasters. For our viewers back at home, today we're talking about climate change and disasters. And as you've heard from Prof, there's a lot of work need to be done to be able to minimize the losses and reduce the disasters that we are seeing at the moment. Until next time, that is all we had for you today. Goodbye.